and welcome to AAMFT's At Home series. My name is Shelley Hansen, and I'm the current president-elect of AAMFT Board of Directors. Welcome to part 5 of our 6-part At Home series. Some of you may recall from last year's AAMFT business meeting, we discussed the role of associations to do good in the world. For AAMFT, this is more than fostering clinical work and research. It is also engaging in work that makes a difference systemically within a community and keeps MFTs in the conversation when policies are set, regulations are determined, and standards create excellence. Throughout this pandemic, AAMFT and our members have been engaged in activities that position us to serve those in need, to have a voice in removing barriers and increasing access to mental health services, and to provide guidance to those who are struggling with our new reality. We have also taken care to support our peers in this profession. Vital resources and trainings have been done by those with experience in telehealth. Helpful strategies have been developed and shared for navigating situations such as working with children or traumatized communities. While this pandemic is still far from ending, I am so proud of how our profession has risen to the challenge. And I want to offer a special thank you to the over 5,500 of you around the world who have welcomed AAMFT into your homes during this series. Being able to share this time with you has reminded me that so much of the strength in our profession is that we all understand how important these connections are. I look forward to sharing our time today and next week for our final session in the series. If you have not already registered for next week's session, I encourage you to do so at aamft.org/at-home. As always, I encourage you to visit our coronavirus update page at aamft.org/coronavirus for up-to-the-minute news and resources. This week, we added several new resources developed and shared by our MFTs. And for our AAMFT members, keep your eye on the Family Therapy e-news as we launch even more resources and virtual events to keep you connected during these times. For those who are not members but are interested in joining AAMFT to be part of events like these in the future, please visit aamft.org/join for more information. CPH is, as the endorsed professional liability insurance provider for AAMFT members, it's proud to sponsor this AAMFT At Home series. CPH provides portable occurrence-form coverage that protects you throughout your professional career. During this time of evolving practices, CPH is pleased to assure you that your policy covers telehealth services as long as such services are permitted under your state's law. A policy with CPH provides peace of mind so you can focus on your career. Get policy highlights and an instant quote online at www.cphins.com. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. David Schnarch. Dr. Schnarch's latest book, Brain Talk, focuses on the interpersonal neurobiology of mind mapping and traumatic mind mapping, including hundreds of pages of brain research tailored for therapists. It's available on Amazon.com. He is the author of the international best-selling books, Passionate Marriage, Intimacy and Desire, Resurrecting Sex, and Constructing the Sexual Crucible. David is the founder of Crucible Therapy, and he directs the Crucible Institute in Evergreen, Colorado. He is a long-term clinical member and supporter of AAMFT and recipient of the 2011 AAMFT Award for Outstanding Contributions to Marriage and Family Therapy. Contact him at service@crucibleinstitute.com. Welcome, Dr. Schnarch.
Thank you, Shelley. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I am, for those of you who don't know, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm a certified sex therapist and board certified in couple and marriage and family therapy from ABAP. And I'm a long-term member and supporter of AAMFT. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a different topic than many of you are familiar with my work. I'm going to shift over now and share my desk so that you can see what I'm going to talk to you about. Today, I'm going to talk to you about traumatic mind mapping during the COVID-19 epidemic, which really is an application of interpersonal neurobiology in daily life. I want to thank AMFT for giving me the opportunity to participate in the At Home series. And I also want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to all of you about this topic. I think marriage and family therapists have a unique opportunity to contribute to the mental health of our country at a time where our nation very badly needs that help. I also want to warn you in advance that because of the topic of traumatic mind mapping, by definition, I'm going to be talking about things that are upsetting. And so if you personally are having a difficult time right now, then it's fine with me if you return and finish watching this presentation at a later time. Now, I also want to alert you to one of the resources that we're really offering. This is from crucible4points.com, our website, and we released a 21-day coronavirus challenge to encourage people to stay home, and while they're at home, to make that productive time. So it's free, it's open to the public. People can come register on our website, and every day for 21 days, you get a video segment, a piece of text, and some discussion questions that are about sexual desire, which most people are interested in, and interpersonal neurobiology. And there's even some stuff in there about therapy as well. And so this is designed to encourage people to stay home, save lives, and when you're in public, wear your mask like all superheroes do. When I'm talking about things today, I know that some of you are going to have the question of, where's your data? Where does this come from? What's your proof? And so I want you to know that it's all published. And many of you know my work for intimacy and desire and passionate marriage. What some of you don't know is that 20 years ago, I started shifting my focus in two ways. I started studying interpersonal neurobiology, and I also started studying my failed to thrive clients. And today I'm going to share with you what I discovered and how this applies to the current situation facing the United States. And Brain Talk was published a year ago in English. It was just released in German. And what you should know is that there are three versions. What's most important is that there's a professional version that is linked to the internet. So if you're interested in reading original research in 3 mouse clicks, you want the professional version. Now, when people say, what's your data? What's the basis of what you're going to talk about? I think it's a legitimate thing to demand. It just is going to interfere with the presentation. So let me just show you briefly that what I'm going to talk to you about is probably the most thoroughly scientifically grounded psychotherapy approach that you're ever going to encounter. I'm going to be talking to you about mind mapping. This is the neurobiology of mind mapping. This is all the neuroanatomy that's involved in mapping your mind, mapping other people's minds. And I'm not going to begin to try to unpack this diagram because you could spend a day just looking at how this is laid out. But what I want to impress upon you is not only is the neuroanatomy of what I'm going to talk to you about all laid out, so is the neurochemistry. It turns out that dopamine and serotonin form a conjoint system that is how your brain tells the difference about whether it's mapping somebody else's feelings or it's mapping their cognitive content. And what you can see here is that there's sort of a left and a right-hand side to this. And this shows you how the neurotransmitters in your head turn on and off to be able to put this system together. And I would venture to say that probably none of you have ever encountered a form of psychotherapy that has this strong a scientific foundation. So everything I'm going to talk to you about, backed up by numerous studies, which are summarized and now published. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about the practical aspects of this. I'm actually going to do this in two phases. Each phase, I'm going to talk to you about mind mapping in neuroscience as it applies to MFTs, and then I'm going to take it and apply it to what's happening with the COVID-19 epidemic, and I'll give you a brief break in between the two phases, okay? So to start with, mind mapping is my way of talking about what's found in the scientific literature as mind. There are many different interpretations of theory of mind, and this is my particular one. What I'll tell you is this is backed up with loads and loads of research. Mind mapping is the brain's ability to make a mental map of another person's mind, also your own mind. It's actually a distributed brain module that's located in both the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, and the prefrontal neocortex. And it actually is a specific functional module that comes on board as the child's brain evolves. It doesn't require learning and teaching because it's a survival skill. That's what you need to keep in mind. Now, it comes on board at age 4 in gangbusters. The rudiments of mind mapping are, you can see it in 6 months of age. But that's called implicit mind mapping because you have to infer that the child has mind mapping ability, and very ingenious experiments have been set up to prove that it exists. Age 4, children have enough language ability that now mind mapping becomes explicit, meaning they will talk to you and you can tell what they're able to test and not. Age 4 is when it really comes on in gangbusters, and you can see it. Actually, all of you have seen it. Age 4, when your child tells their first lie, that is scientific evidence that your child now has mind mapping ability. Because what has happened is your child has finally figured out that your mind is capable of a false belief, and then the biggest game in town is implanting that false belief. And kids are terrible liars, but when your kid tells their first white lie, that's the end of privacy as you've known it. At age 11 or 12, mind mapping reorganizes into adult form. So just about the time that a kid's hormones are kicking in, their brain is kicking in, and they're now able to understand complex sexual motivation. And the neurobiology, neurophysiology, and the development of mind mapping ability in children is all laid out. What's amazing is that most of us just take this for granted because mind mapping is so much a part of daily life, it's virtually invisible to us. Now, mind mapping starts very young. If you're looking for a reference, there's a great book published 2008 called Theory of Mind, How Children Understand Others' Feelings. And there are countless studies that will just amaze you. But here's what you need to know. At age 4, children understand that what people do is connected with what's in their minds. They're basically born psychologists. And they understand the subjective internal states of other people. They understand that what people do is connected with what's in their minds, and it goes both ways. If you can figure out what people want, you can predict what they're going to do. But if you watch what they do, that's how you can deduce what they want. And so this, as I said, is a survival mechanism. We get it from snakes and frogs. And so it's very, very hard to beat a kid's radar, and it starts much earlier than most of us think. By the age of 3, children understand discrepant desires between people. They understand that 2 people may want different things, and only one of them is going to be happy about the outcome. Which means that kids understand something that a lot of marriage and family therapists don't, who are always talking about win-win. 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds understand that everything in life is not win-win. By the age of 4, children understand that someone can want something objectively bad to happen. And by age 6, children understand that a parent can want something as an outcome bad for the child, for themselves. Children can see when parents enjoy hitting them and enjoy torturing them. And even a 2-year-old can intuit whether a caregiver is positively or negatively disposed towards them. Virtually everybody has mind mapping ability. There are some disorders that do interfere with mind mapping ability, but by and large, most people have it. Mind mapping, as I said, is a survival skill. And you also need to know there's no gender difference. Women like to think that they're better at mind mapping other people, and that's what us guys like them to believe because we can get away with a whole lot more. But believe it or not, men like to survive too, and so that's why men also have mind mapping ability. And if you take a look at this kid is got you mapped. He is thinking, and by the way, in case you can't tell, he's not particularly happy about what he's seeing. Now, mind mapping is very, very sophisticated, so much so that the brain has developed a way of trying to defeat it, and that's called mind masking. This is a family sequestering at home for the COVID epidemic, and what you can see is the way that they are getting by is the way many families get by, and that is where people pretend that they don't have mind mapping ability and they're not masking each other. Mind masking is the ability to defeat other people mapping you. And what you can see is, on the one hand, mind masking provides social distance when there isn't much physical distance. And so when you look at this family, it looks like nobody is paying attention to anybody. The dog is paying attention to whatever the guy's watching on his computer, and that's about it. And so this family is acting like nobody's tracking each other. So you need to know. Oh, by the way, did I tell you that this is a picture of the home of a marriage and family therapist during the COVID epidemic? Yes, even marriage and family therapists mask their minds too. In fact, you'd be a bad therapist if you couldn't mask your mind sometimes. And you'd also be not a very good MFT if you also didn't have really good mind mapping ability. Now, as I started to work with mind mapping and study it more, I realized I needed to develop a new term to explain what I was seeing, and that is traumatic mind mapping. A lot of people like to believe that the picture we just saw is the way that most families are, but this is unfortunately another slice of married life. Traumatic mind mapping occurs when you map out somebody else's mind, and what you see is so terrible, so upsetting, that it traumatizes your mind, and it also physically impacts your brain as well. And when you look at this picture, it looks like the boy is trying to cut off hearing his mother, but the real impact of what's happening here is mapping her mind. This is the kind of behavior that I saw when I started studying my failed to thrive clients. What was happening was people were coming in and reporting stories, and it was very clear from their stories that the parents had mind mapping ability because they couldn't do what they were doing any other way. And these parents were intrusive, ruthless people who felt entitled to do whatever they wanted. Some believed that whatever they did was legitimate and they had a right to do, but others knew that what they were doing was clearly wrong and did it anyway. And many of them lacked the ability to invest in another human being. Some were actively exploiting and torturing their children. Traumatic mind mapping often involves realizing that your parents have mind mapping ability and they're tracking you while they're doing difficult things. For instance, this mother is tracking this boy. She can see the impact that she's having. She's probably having a physical resonance where she can feel how he is feeling. But what she wants to do is not just put something in his ear, she wants to put something in his mind. She wants to put in the picture of how she feels about him. And this is what traumatic mind mapping is all about. It turns out that there are loads of traumatic mind mapping in daily life. It turns out that sexual abuse, for instance, more often occurs by traumatic mind mapping than any other form. The difficulty with sexual abuse is most people are looking for some reportable behavior that would stand up in a court of law to prove that, in fact, what they think happened to them did happen. But long before you have a behavioral reportable violation, you have a violation that occurs on the level of mind mapping. And so this person doesn't have to touch you. All you have to do is look into his mind. And it wouldn't make any difference if what you thought was going to happen was he was going to physically abuse you or sexually abuse you. It's his mind as much as it's any behavior. How does this show up in daily life? Well, I remember a client talking to me about bringing her boyfriend home after a date, and she's in her teenage years, and the father asks the boy whether the daughter is any good in bed. You don't even have to be present. On a secondary level, you can feel that hit you. That's how traumatic mind mapping works, and it goes on all the time in families and in couples. The negative impacts of traumatic mind mapping are highly treatable. I want you to know that before we go any further. Now that I've laid out about traumatic mind mapping, you understand mind mapping and traumatic mind mapping, I want to transition to what's happening to people, just rank and file people in public in the days of the COVID epidemic. It's happening on multiple levels. I'm going to show you a series of pictures, and I'm going to walk you through them, and I'm going to encourage you to map the minds of the people that you see here. These are frontline workers. Some of them are going to be your clients. And if you're going to understand their experience, and all of us are going to appreciate their experience, we need to make ourselves really understand what they've gone through, because they've had traumatic mind mapping. If you let yourself just take a moment to look at each person, what you can see is some of them are still hyper alert, and many of them are just overwhelmed. They're stunned, they're traumatized. And they're not just going to be traumatized about the fact that people die. These were people, they had relationships with them. They looked in their minds while they were having difficulty breathing on the ventilators. They had the anxiety and the panic of not having enough PPEs to protect themselves. This is what you see in wartime. And the difficulty is that not only is this happening to our frontline workers, it's happening to people who see the frontline workers on TV and on the internet. And so there is secondary, tertiary trauma of mind mapping going on here on an unprecedented level. When the workers are getting on television and begging for proper equipment to protect themselves, or you think about this man suiting up to go into battle, where he's also fighting with the issue of he doesn't have what he needs to protect himself. He's also thinking about going home. If he's not single, then he has to worry about infecting his family. And he is thinking about his family. And so now we are all exposed to this. We are all in this together. Not just in terms of spreading virus. We are all in this together because the brain wires interpersonally, and we are being affected by each other. If you let yourself map this person's mind, and you think about what it has taken to produce this in this person. You don't even know whether it's male or female. It doesn't make any difference. Just by looking at the body, your mind maps out that person's mind. And when you see patients and you can get into this man's mind, what he must be thinking, and you can get into his nurse's or doctor's mind about what she's thinking, what she's going to be thinking about when she goes home, and what's going to happen when the rest of the general public sees this. Because the way that part of the brain works, that to see this is to experience it in your own body. And I'm not talking about mirror neurons, I'm talking about von Economo neurons, which are unique to human beings and also are in a part of the brain that I'm going to talk to you about shortly. And if you're having difficulty getting into these people's minds, the internet makes it easy because this survivor is willing to talk with you so that you can map his mind. And so our exposure to traumatic mind mapping is unprecedented. This is the good and the bad of it. This happens to be a husband and wife team of doctors who met each other as they're passing between their respective emergency rooms. And you can see the way they're mapping each other. That's all it is. It's all mind mapping. And when you see these people, they may look like happy senior citizens, but they're not happy. They're basically saying, don't kill me. They're saying, who the hell are you to go out without a mask? But they can't do that, and they have to look like this. But think about their feelings and think about what's happening to people in the nursing homes. If you're in as a client, if you are in there as staff, whether your family, somebody in your family is working as a staff member inside one of these facilities. And with the loss of jobs and with the economic uncertainty that unfortunately also hits those of us who are the least advantaged and the most vulnerable, think about the impact on other people's minds. Think about the economic hardship, the loss of jobs, what record unemployment looks like on a house-by-house level. Because children are in these homes looking at their parents. And after a while, I don't care how good a masker you are, your kid figures out that you're masking. This is a food line that is backed up into the highway. When you see this as somebody who has lots of food, it still hits you. And in each one of these cars, there is somebody in there that is hoping that they don't run out of food by the time that they get there, that are wondering how they're going to make ends meet. And some of them are in there with partners and they're watching each other and mapping each other. And very often there are children in these lines as well. And then we have to deal with the fact that there are 80,000 plus, I think it's 86,000 today, people who have died in the United States. You can think about the priest. You can think about his assistant, what they are thinking when they have seen so much of this. But so many of us have also seen the freezer trailers where they're stacking up bodies. And you don't have to be in Italy where they're using an ice rink as a mortuary. All you have to do is see the pictures and it has the impact. And whether it is someone you love has died, or you are stressing about the fact that you can't be with them as they die, and you're imagining what is going through their mind as they're dying, the amount of traumatic mind mapping is just overwhelming. This might look like Bosnia in the late 1990s. This is New York City burying the people whose bodies nobody wants. Think about what it's like to be one of these workers. Think about what it's like to just see this. Because this is about not only, these are people, but the other part is this kind of picture and being exposed to this is going to hit us in ways that many of us are just not prepared for because we don't understand the neuroscience behind it. Now, this is the first piece that I wanted to cover. There is another piece here, but I think we need to take a breath. I know I do. I can tell you that putting this presentation together was incredibly impactful for me. And I know even as a therapist, when I'm hearing really, really terrible stuff, sometimes I have to say to my clients, wait a second, I need a minute. So whether you need that minute or out of respect for all the people that we have lost, why don't we just take a deep breath, or two or three, and just settle ourselves down and be respectful of our own loss. So now I want to go back to talking about marriage and family therapy. I want to tell you what happened when I started studying my failed to thrive clients. And what I found was that they had a couple of things in common, and the things they had in common were very, very powerful. And one of the things that they had in common was not simply that they came out of really bad homes, but they were describing their parents doing such terrible things that it was disgusting. It was really disgusting things. Like you're 5 years old and you walk into the living room and your father is having sex with the maid doggy style, and he sees you and he smiles at you and he keeps going. And in this way, he ingratiates you and brings you into it. Or if you take a look at the picture of what's on the screen, the boy's being beaten, but he's being beaten with the buckle end of it, which is what makes it particularly disgusting. And so what I did was I started studying disgust, because it turns out that the neuroscience behind disgust is virtually brand new. It happens to be, I think, one of the cutting edge areas where marriage and family therapists are going to start looking at, where the amygdala sort of becomes old hat and we start looking at other parts of the brain because we develop a different picture of how people really function. It turns out that the first book on disgust was published by Psychological Association within the last 8 years. And it basically said, from a clinical perspective, we really don't understand much about this at all. So let me tell you what I learned. Disgust is an automatic aversive reaction hardwired in the brain to withdraw from the object or person of strong revulsion. Now, I knew that disgust was a hardwired brain reaction because I was studying mind mapping. But this is when I realized that what was actually happening was the parents of my failed to thrive clients were actually triggering interpersonal neurobiological reactions in their children's brain. That's when I knew I was on to something important. It turns out that disgust is a form of embodied cognition. As I said, it's one of 6 hardwired brain reactions, including disgust, anger, and contempt. It has a universal facial expression that's hardwired and recognizable anywhere in the world. The disgust reaction is designed to help you avoid potentially harmful substances that are unclean or inedible or infectious or gory, like dead bodies or body parts. It can be experienced by smell, taste, touch, vision, or even your imagination. And this is the second survival mechanism. It turns out disgust is a survival mechanism. It is designed to keep you safe by making you move away from disgusting objects. It turns out that the focus of the disgust reaction is located in the anterior insula. And there is absolutely fabulous research coming out in the last 10 years, cutting edge, about brain science of disgust reaction. And it has tremendous application for understanding the development of right brain therapies, neurobiological therapies for marriage and family therapy. Antonio Damasio says that this region, the anterior insula, plays an important role in understanding and mapping visceral states in other people, not just your own, but other people's as well, that gives an emotional experience that eventually gives rise to conscious feelings. And you need to know that the anterior insula has a one-to-one relationship between disgust reaction. You're not going to have a disgust reaction if the anterior insula doesn't light up. And it turns out the anterior insula is also an information superhighway that not only integrates your body reaction, but it's how you map other people's body reactions and mental reactions as well. So as the brain developed, it originally started a disgust reaction where it was a gustatory or olfactory reaction. It was about eating food and keeping away from rotting objects. But as the human brain evolved and we became capable of moral disgust, the brain used the exact same brain anatomy to be able to be capable of processing moral disgust as well. And moral disgust is also a universal hardwired reaction. What you need to realize is children's mind mapping ability, which I laid out before, thrusts them into having involuntary disgust reactions with extremely bad parents. And since you're not allowed to put disgust and parenting in the same sentence because people go nuts, there's really no way for the children of people who do disgusting things to deal with it. Their complaints show up as repeated stomach aches where the kid doesn't want to go to school, or impacted bowels, or encopresis, enuresis. Loss of bladder and bowel control in children is a very common result from repeated disgust reactions. What would be an example of something like this? For instance, a mother who locks herself in her bedroom, makes horrible blood-curdling noises, and draws the child to bang on the door till the child's hysterical, and then opens the door and calms the child, soothes them. Or you're a teenager and your mother invites you to take a cross-country trip with her lover and also says, don't tell your father when we come home. Moral disgust is a universal reaction. It comes from a violation of basic decency, things like abuse and cruelty and lying and murder and rape. The short-term impacts of disgusting behavior are not only the disgust reaction, but it also forces your mind mapping to shut down. This is one of the things that I discovered. It turns out the anterior insula is not part of the mind mapping system, but it is wired into the same parts of the brain that do the mind mapping. And there's something called functional control, where one part of the brain takes control and shuts down another part of the brain. And it turns out that when you have a disgust reaction, your mind mapping system collapses. And this is why children deny that their parents have mind mapping ability, not simply because they can't get it through their head that their parents could be doing things this bad, but the event is also stored with errors in autobiographical memory. And repeated exposure to disgusting parental behavior eventually can impair children's disgust reaction. This is also what eventually happens is you see this in children from highly destructive families where they have difficulty being able to regulate their body, the physiology. They can't regulate their heart rate well because this has an impact on the HPA stress response axis. Some of you know the phrase vagal tone. It's about heart rate variability, and repeated disgust reactions basically destroy vagal tone. and they produce emotional dead spots in people, which are a function of apparently right brain, left brain shut down. And you get to the point, you can't think straight. I've now looked at groups of neurobiological problems and been able to put them into 5 groups. There are mind mapping impairments, there are non-psychotic thinking disorders, there are non-psychotic emotional dysregulation disorders, there are disgust reactions impairments where you can have either no disgust reaction or you can have an eroticized disgust reaction, which turns out to be not at all uncommon. And there are additional impacts of repeated disgust reactions like having masked face and verbal and facial tics. The repeated signs of traumatic mind mapping and repeated disgust reactions are depression and anxiety and a real sense of uncertainty. So you should pay attention that the general public, 2/3 of people are reporting increased anxiety and uncertainty. There's also anger, rage, helplessness, loneliness, and despair, and sleeping disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorders. You should know that originally people thought OCD was an anxiety reaction, but the more recent research suggests it's actually a response to a disgust reaction. People feel like they are treading water, just holding on as best they can. They're feeling the overall uncertainty about letting things go and what's going to happen in society. But that is something that we can get through. But when the person in charge looks like they're going out of their ways to stifle those efforts and doing things that are counterproductive and encourage things that put people at risk, it is the same thing as when your father or mother are encouraging your siblings to go out and do something that puts them at risk. Part of what's happening is this is tapping and with unnecessarily. Dealing with COVID is one thing. Dealing with things like traumatic mind mapping and disgust reactions is just more than a lot of people can have. People are talking about being tapped out, not having extra capacity. All they can do is not flip out and yell at the kids. And that's not simply because of stress, it's because of meaning. The meaning of how can we be this country where we could have led the world and showed the world how to deal with it, and we now have more deaths than any country. So what can you do? Number one, wear your mask in public like all superheroes do. Even the dogs are wearing masks, and don't criticize this doggy for not covering his nose, because there are masks for dogs. If dogs are wearing masks, wear your mask. It's not simply a personal right. It's about understanding our place in society. You need to practice good social distancing. You need to very often work from home. Many of us have shifted over to HIPAA compliant teleconferencing, but there's still the micro stress of the logistics of trying to be able to work at home. And so take the advice from these dogs. Number one, early morning walks are good. Number two, do not sniff or lick other people and wash your paws. Now, there needs to be room for humor, but we need to deal with this as real trauma. And one of the best ways to deal with trauma is taking action. It means do what you can do now to be constructive. Volunteering telehealth services to frontline workers is a great way to do that. Encouraging your clients to also take action is terribly important. And it's not too early for us to be thinking about what will come of this on the other side. We will, of course, get through this, but this is the time for us to be preparing for post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth occurs when your old ways of life are destroyed, and the only way of responding requires a more sophisticated response, a higher order response than you previously were capable of. And with that, it means your view of the world changes too, because it involves accepting what can be and what won't. But it's not too early for you to be planning what you're going to do 6 months from now, and it's important to start envisioning what that might look like. And that means whether we're talking about political activism or we're talking about visiting your grandmother. Taking action is terribly important. COVID, we will get through this, but how we go through it determines how we will come out. Help people understand what's happening to them. People do not understand that they are being impacted on a neurobiological level, and they cannot protect themselves. Helping your clients understand about traumatic mind mapping and during the pandemic helps them protect themselves 3 different ways. Number 1, it allows you to process your personal experience more accurately and thoroughly. Number 2, it allows you to implement methods to resolve traumatic mind mapping, which can be done. And number 3, it means that you can then shield yourself from unnecessary exposure to traumatizing minds. This means, number 1, setting limits on watching news on TV and online. It means when you watch, pay attention to the fact that you are mapping these people's minds out. Don't spend extra time mapping these people out. But if you do look at what you've already mapped out and understand what it is and look at how it makes you feel. There are lots of things you can do and your clients can do to process traumatic mind mapping and disgust reactions. And these are laid out in detail in Brain Talk. Now, Brain Talk is actually 2 books in one. The general text is written for the general public, and it's about 350 pages that explains basically what I've talked about. But there are 4 appendices that contain all the underlying brain science that you're going to want that summarizes and supports what I'm telling you today. But you want to pay attention to the professional version because that is an ebook version that is hyperlinked to hundreds of original free articles on the internet. So if you're a busy clinician looking for quick access to the original research, or you want to study interpersonal neurobiology, take a look at the professional version. Now, in conclusion, I want to announce, I'm very happy to announce that over this weekend, probably by Monday, we will open our new bilingual website at crucible4points.com. And there you'll find the 21-day Crucible Coronavirus Challenge, which focuses on sexual desire problems and interpersonal neurobiology. And when we released this a week ago, we had over 1,000 people sign up in 4 days. So based on this, probably at the time when we open up the new website in 2 or 3 days, we will release our second Crucible Coronavirus Virus Challenge, which is a month-long, 31-day program focused on the interpersonal neurobiology that I've talked about here, because we want to make it available, and it will be bilingual in both German and English. So that will be up in a couple of days. Our website is open now if you want to see the 21-day program. And so I hope you found this presentation both practical and useful. Marriage and family therapists can play a vital role in helping people recover from the viral pandemic and the interpersonal neurobiological epidemic that the United States is now suffering. So stay home, stay safe, save lives, do good work, and wear your mask in public like all superheroes do. Thanks a lot.